What up? What up? This is Brandon Risher, and you are listening to The Slant. with Brandon Risher. Tonight we're going to talk about relationships, communication specific to relationships. How do you communicate? How do you talk about things in a healthy manner? How do you have productive conversations? And how do you address with conflict resolution? So I'm flying solo today. So I'm going to do things a little bit different, but hopefully you'll have an entertaining and a great experience. Because what I'm trying to do here with this show is to give new angles and new perspectives. So I'm going to start it a little bit different today. I'm going to start off by telling a story. So I think the story is going to give some context to everything that I'm going to talk about going forward. Okay. So about a year ago, I had a patient reach out to me that said that she needed some relationship advice. So she comes in, I see her in the waiting room, and it's this beautiful 38-year-old black woman. Very professional looking, very on her game from a presentation standpoint. And I'm just thinking to myself, I wonder what relationship problems that she has. So she comes in and she proceeds to tell me a little bit more about what was going on in her life. And she had been married once before and it didn't work out. And she was really progressing in her career and she was making good money. She had two kids from from the previous marriage, and she was ready to get it back on the dating scene. So I said, great. Let's hear a little bit more about kind of what you're going through. Let's see how I could be of assistance. So she proceeds to tell me she's in the banking industry. So, in the Charlotte area, that's the industry here, banking. So she's telling me about her work hours. She worked from about 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday, kind of that mandatory overtime, but, she's making a good bit of bread. So give a little bit more background. She's from the South. Her mother had a job, but her father was clearly the breadwinner of her family. She very much revered her father and her mother. They had a good working relationship. It seemed like they were on the same page. So she's very much looking for the same thing in another husband. Her husband was not necessarily the breadwinner of the family, and that was a point of contention for their relationship. So as we go along, and we go along through the session, she's telling me, how she feels that she's a great catch, and she's not really understanding exactly why she's not able to really get some of the guys that she's seeking. So again, she's telling me about her career. She makes good money. She likes to travel. She likes to do all of these great things. And she's just, again, confused about why isn't she the commodity that she seeks. So I says, well, tell me a little bit more about what you're looking for. Well, I'm looking for a man, when we first date, I think it's a man's responsibility to take me out and to get to know me, and we kind of court. I want somebody to, almost chase me. And I was like, okay, well, it's a little bit different. So I said, well, what are you a good catch for exactly? And she says, well, I'm a good catch to be, for a man to want to date me. And I said, well, I want you to think about it a little bit differently. I said, so you want a man to treat you traditionally, yet you have such a non-traditional life. You work 12 hours a day, Monday through Friday from 7 to 7. You have two kids. You talk about how much you want to spend time with them. So how do you really have time to really cultivate dating? Well, she says, well, I want, this is what I'm seeking. I said, okay, well, I hear what you're saying, but your career is communicating something different to all the prospective men that you're seeking. So what she was really talking about, what she wanted, was very different than what her career and her lifestyle really provided. I said, you're a great catch for a certain type of guy, or you might be even a great catch as far as having a husband, but in the dating aspect of it, the way your career is, and you're looking for a man to kind of provide some of these traditional things, are not really aligned. And so the story is really an allegory to how we communicate things all the time. And sometimes that could be at odds with what our behavior is or at odds of what we seek. So when we're talking about communication, the first thing that I want to talk about is, well, what is it, right? What is communication? What's the point of it? And why is it so difficult for people to really communicate clearly? So the way I define communication is through this. Communication is clarity towards action. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Communication is clarity towards action. That you are trying to communicate both verbally and non-verbally in a way that gives someone or some people some better understanding of what you are wanting to do, what you're thinking, what you're feeling, so that something can be done. More often than not, people want to say, well, I just want to be heard. And I said, okay, if you want to be heard, what do you want someone to take from that? Because ultimately, you can speak until you're blue in the face, you can communicate your feelings, but ultimately, if someone isn't doing something with this knowledge, then you don't feel that you're really being heard. So part of what I try to do as a therapist, and part of what I'm going to try to do today, is to give you a better understanding of why it is so essential to communicate well. People talk all the time. When there's a lack of communication, it's usually because there's a lot of people talking at each other and not with each other. And more often than not, that is because people are not on the same page of what they're talking about in the first place. So let's see here. So again, going back to verbalizing versus communicating. Now, verbalizing is clearly what we are speaking. There's an example that I use, the show Friends, which is a lot of people love, in the 90s and grew up, that a lot of people love Friends. And Friends was such a great show from a psychological perspective for this reason. If you put the show on mute, you could still have a pretty good idea of what the show was about. If Joey was anxious, you could tell. If Phoebe was kind of all over the place, you could tell. You could tell very easily. Their face matched what they were saying. So then if you watch the show again and you heard what they were saying, it aligned very well. While some other shows, you can't do that as well. And part of that's kind of a TV trick, that can you express through your face and through your body actually what you are actually saying. So in a lot of times when we're talking about communication, we are communicating with our bodies all the time. As you can see, I'm talking with my hands, so that might, suggest animation. We're always trying to communicate in some way. And sometimes what we're communicating with our bodies or through our actions are different than what we're verbalizing. So first and foremost, you definitely want to get those things on the same page. Now, this comes from awareness. And you can get awareness through a myriad of things. You can get awareness through therapy, obviously. You can get awareness through listening to people and asking to have a better understanding of oneself that is beyond what you feel you already know. There's a phrase that I use in therapy all the time, which is knowledge does not care to know. And what that means is once I feel that I know something, I don't have to go on a quest to try to figure out anything else. There's nothing else for me to learn. If I know 1 + 1, there's no faster way for me to learn how to calculate that. I got that down. So there is nothing that you're going to tell me that is going to give me any more information about how to do that calculation. Well, when it comes to ourselves or specific to relationships, we do that. Well, I know what my man wants. I know what my wife wants. Well, in doing so, what you are also saying is there's nothing else for me to learn. That you're constantly learning someone. And that's part of through asking questions and having those verbal sense of communication, but also seeing body language and being inquisitive about the body language so that what you are hearing and what you are seeing can be more aligned. More often than not, we're always trying to reconcile what we see versus what we already know. We're always trying to do that as individuals. So the more that you can talk about, hey, this is what I'm seeing. I see that you say that you're okay, but your arms are crossed like this, which tends to communicate that you want some distance. Reconcile those two ideas for me. And when I'm saying this is really difficult for people. Why? Because it's not natural. It's not natural to ask somebody to say, I see that, your body language is suggesting something that is different than what you're saying. What we'll say is, hey, baby, you okay? Yeah, I'm good. You sure? Yeah, I'm good. And then we just go on about our business. So always trying to talk and communicate and say, this is what I'm seeing. And if you love someone and care for someone, what you can do is to be able to go on and have a better understanding. So one of the things that people talk about when I'm working either with a couple or an individual is they're wanting to have a good versus a productive conversation. And sometimes those are two very different things. So I'm going to give a little bit of an understanding of the difference. So a good conversation can be a conversation that gives you a lot of information, that has you. It doesn't necessarily resolve anything, but you feel that you're armed with more knowledge than you were before the conversation started. So, for example, if somebody is stressing out at work and they're taking it out on their relationship, and they say, you know what, babe, I'm just really, stressing out at work. My boss feels that I'm not doing a great job, or I feel that I'm stuck in my career, and I'm sorry I'm taking it out on you. Then that's a good conversation. You've learned something. You've been able to align what you're seeing versus what someone is saying. A productive conversation, however, is different. A productive conversation has good elements in it, but the difference is you actually produce something. There's something that can be done with this knowledge that can make the relationship go forward. So sometimes something is good, but it isn't necessarily productive. And again, that's not a bad thing. It's just that one is about process and one is about product, right? To produce something means there's a product that comes from something that is different than when you started. So when you're having a conversation, you have to kind of figure out kind of in real time, is this something that should be productive or is this something that is going to be good? Some people feel that they want a conversation to be resolved all the time. Well, I'm mad about this. How do we resolve this? And so I'll give you an example. So how about something that is not just about resolving an issue, but looking at a larger picture. So I had a couple that I was working with, and the guy said that he would grow his hair out, like maybe about once a year when they were dating. He would grow his hair out, and when it would get colder. So a couple of years ago, he says he's in the mirror and he's getting ready to go to work, and he had missed a couple of haircuts. Said he got a haircut, pretty frequently, and says, "Hey, babe, I'm thinking about growing my hair out." And she immediately said, "Absolutely not." And he was just like, "Well, what the hell? Like, that's weird. I just said I was thinking about it. I didn't even say that I was going to do it." And she says, "Well, how would you feel if I cut my hair?" And he was like, "Well, that's not the same. They're both fruits, but that's not an apples to apples, because if you don't like the hair growth, I can just cut my hair. If you cut your hair, you can't grow it back as fast as I can cut it." So he says he goes back, he goes to work, but that's just bugging him because he's like, wow, that's so weird that she would bring something up that appears so minor and yet make this big stink about it. So he said he gets back home, and this is a couple of days before they came to see me, and says, "Well, hey, that's really weird that I'm just was mentioning that I was gonna, let my hair grow, and you freaked out about it as if I told you I was gonna leave you or something like that." I think that was something that he said. And she says, "Well, I just don't like your hair long." He's like, "Well, okay, but it was just a thought. I was just thinking out loud." So we go a little bit more into the depths of their history, and she has long hair, and she says, well, she cut it once, and when she did, her father and her brother freaked out and didn't communicate with her for months. So she was triggered by you taking power, by doing something to your hair and changing your appearance, that there can have ramifications. So she was actually acting upon that the way that they had acted upon with him. So it was like, oh, okay, so this is a larger issue about power. If you try to resolve the hair issue, that's not really the issue at all. That's something that can be addressed. Ultimately, he did not let his hair grow. But what they could talk about was that power dynamic that she felt and how that was starting to translate into other aspects of their relationship. So again, learning about each other and verbalizing, but also thinking like, hey, that seems a little weird. How would you get so, because most arguments are relatively mundane, superficially. Hey, you need to pick up your socks. Hey, why don't you take me out anymore? Why don't you do these things? And usually there's some larger kind of thematic context to them. But if you're only talking about these specific issues and trying to resolve these issues, nothing is ever really, produced from it that can help the relationship grow. You can resolve these minor things all the time and never address like, oh, do you feel that there's a power dynamic that you feel that by me growing my hair, I am trying to exercise and you feel that you can't do that? How does that, show itself in other aspects of the relationship? So something you always want to think about is when you're trying to communicate with respect to a relationship, what am I actually trying to get out of this? So another thing that I would say when it comes to relationships is being on the same page. A lot of times that people are conversing really hard about one thing, but they're on parallel tracks. The idea is similar enough that if you look at it, it seems like you're talking about the same thing, but if you ever seen parallel streets, they'll go in the same direction, but they never intersect. And it's the intersection of the conversation that is so important. So sometimes, there are these things called logical fallacies that can assist with this. So one logical fallacy is the straw man argument. So, it could be, hey, I want to go out with my boys. Oh, so you want to go out every night? Oh, every night of the day you want to go out? And you're like, well, of course not, sweetheart. Why are you making such a big deal out of me trying to do one thing and you're making it this huge thing? Where, or you always travel. It's like, I've traveled 3 times. What are you talking about? So it's similar enough in its logic, but you're like, but it's also an extreme argument that they can then knock down and then you never really get anywhere. And then both people are frustrated. It's the false equivalency level of communication. Well, you did this, but what about the time that you did this other thing too? Or you know what? Yes, you know what? I forgot our anniversary. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to make up for it. But you know what? You did forget my birthday 4 years ago. What about that? False equivalencies. And what that does is once you spark that anger or once you spark that frustration, your ability to communicate just kind of goes out the window. So again, you have to say, well, hold on. Well, what are we talking about? And understanding logical fallacies or these other parameters to a relationship are so important because when you veer off from the main topic, then like, hey, babe, we're not talking about this. We're talking about something else. So I'll give you an example of what that means kind of in a larger context. So one day I'm in a staff meeting and we were talking about race. For whatever reason, they wanted to talk about race. And so I'm talking about my, perspective of the black plight in America. And I'm talking about the historical nature of it. And one of my colleagues who's a woman says, hey, that's similar to the women's plight. And they're going on and on and on about the women's plight. And I said, hey, I understand that the women's plight is very important. Right now, we are talking about race. So if you try to equivocate the women's plight to the plight of African Americans, we're going to talk about 2 things that, again, both groups have been subjugated, but we need to focus on the topic of race. This topic is important enough for us to simply focus on this, and then we can get to that at another time. So though that is a larger socio-political thing, the parallel is when somebody tries to veer you off of the message, then sometimes you can get so bogged down in the minutia of everything else that you kind of lose sight of the main point and your communication starts to decrease. So thinking about that, thinking about levels of communication. So now I want to talk about miscommunication a little bit more. When there's a miscommunication, one thing that I tend to say is somebody benefits from it. So let's say somebody is vague about a date or a time or something like that. Or it could be something larger about an understanding. Usually if there's some vagueness about the communication, somebody tends to benefit from it, whether it is explicitly or implicitly. So a lot of times with your partner, what you have to say is ask questions of clarification. Well, hold on. If you know that your husband is not very specific about date nights, you're like, hey, I need you to give me date and time. And not waiting, because what happens quite a bit is that people tend to want to test their mate. And when you test them, there's one answer and an infinite amount of wrong ones. And sometimes miscommunication is a way of saying, well, you know what, he's been vague before. Let's see if he's going to be specific now. Knowing that he probably won't be, you get frustrated, you all get in an argument, and then nothing really occurs. So always thinking about if there's a miscommunication, if there's some vagueness, if there's something that I don't understand, hopefully that I can get the great freedom from this partner, from my partner of mine, to ask. Because again, communication is clarity towards action. I cannot stress that enough. If you are not clear about the important things, not everybody's going to be clear about everything, right? We're human beings. We're going to fall. We're going to fall short of the ideal of what we want to be. But if we really want to be these things for our partners, for our girlfriends, for our boyfriends, for our wives, for our husbands, we have to be clear. So, we're about halfway through. So I asked some questions from some of my patients and some of my friends. So here's some questions that I'm going to say. So question number one: what are some tools you can use to make people communicate in the right way? So one of the tools that I use, or a lot of people come with me with, is the 5 love languages. I'm sure most people out there have heard about the 5 love languages, and people come and say, well, my love language is gift giving. My love with it, if you don't have the energy, it does not matter how much time you have. Now, if you're saying, you know what, I just really want somebody that I can lay on when I go to sleep so I can go back to work, it's not quality time. Or if it's gift giving, or if it's acts of service, really talk about, are these things fixed, or are all these things evolving based on the changing circumstances that I have with my partner? So that is one tool. There are quite a few tools, but one of the things that I really try to say is check in with each other regularly, like schedule checking in. Like I have couples that check in every Sunday. Hey babe, how are we? What are we doing? What were our highlights? What were our lowlights? Anything that really bothered you? More often than not, it's probably like, no, we had a good week, and you keep it pushing. But sometimes you say, you know what? There was something that I was trying to express to you. I don't feel you really got it. I've been holding on to that for a few days. I know you kind of felt it. I was kind of a little cold in bed. I was kind of distant, didn't text you as much as, you would have. The more often that you can check in with each other, the better off you'll be. And for this very basic reason, there's multitude of reasons, but this very basic reason. The one emotion we are not built for as human beings is anxiety. We are built for every other emotion: anger, sadness, embarrassment. There's things that we can do with that. The one thing we are not built with as human beings is anxiety. So let's say you wake up in the morning, you're like, hey babe, how you doing? And she kind of gives you the cold shoulder, and you're like, oh, what did I do? And she doesn't tell you. And you go to work, and you're like, man, what did I do? I'm not sure. And you ask, hey babe, is everything okay? Yeah, I'm fine. And they walk out the door. That's going to permeate every aspect of you until you know. Or you're going to come up with your own conclusion, and it may not necessarily be the right one. And that's why checking in is so important. Each day that you are unsure of something is a day that will weigh on your body. It will weigh on your sleep. It will weigh on your ability to eat. It will weigh on your ability to use the bathroom, which will, again, can continue to exacerbate all of these things. That's minor thing. So if you feel that you have a relationship in which you cannot talk to your spouse, then you need to evaluate the relationship here, as a foundational thing. If you cannot tell the one you love how you really feel, that is impacting you, then that's going to weigh on you, and ultimately you're not going to be as close as you could be. So that's one of the big things I always try to say. Another thing that I try to convey to people is the if then, which is, if I give you these things you seek, how would that make your life and or our life better? Because a lot of times people want something without having any understanding of what they're going to get if they actually get it. It's just like a career. If you're trying to pursue yourself as an entrepreneur, what happens when you're exceptional? Not if you fail. Failure is easy. But what happens if you are actually exceptional at what you do? What if you have to say no to people? What if you have who's a class clown? All right, you want attention, now you have it. What do you want to do with it? Nothing. So it's like, well, hold on. You made me stop class to give you this attention, and yet you don't want anything from it. So if you don't have any context to why you're seeking these things, over time, your partner will become frustrated because you are asking them to devote energy and time and thoughtfulness to all of these things that you're wanting. yet you don't really have anything that you're wanting to gain from it. And over time, people will become resentful. More often than not, when I've worked with couples, there's usually one or two precipitating events that fundamentally changes the relationship. That there was some failure that could be small, could be large. But if you're not talking about those things, if you're not saying, hey, I was really disappointed in the fact that, we tried to buy a house and it fell through and you just said, screw it and we'll never try again. You have to talk about that. So always talking about and realizing, if I want this thing for my partner, what do I want to gain? So if I have a man that's really successful, what do I gain from that? And what do I lose from that? If I want a man who's really, really successful in America, you have to work. Like you're not going to make $300,000 a year and get off at 430. That tends not to happen in our society. So if you want that, then what does that do for you other than give you access to more of your own money? What do you want to do? Do you all want to invest together? Do you want to grow? What do you want to do? If you want somebody to listen to you, if you want somebody to grow with you, what do you want to gain? So that would be something else that I would say. All right, so what happens when your spouse stonewalls you or just doesn't say anything? When you're wanting to communicate, hey, babe, I have something in my mind. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. That's a difficult thing, which happens quite a bit. I'm done talking about this. I feel that I've said everything that I have to say. You don't listen. What's the point? Well, one of the things that I'll try to say to people is, well, guess what they're thinking. And you could be wrong, but human beings have a tendency to correct you. So think about it from a different perspective. You say, well, okay, first and say, what do you feel that I wasn't hearing? What do you feel that I wasn't listening to or doing? How do we get here? So get off the topic itself, or just go do something else. Sometimes in the moment, somebody is not prepared to say something that is going to be productive. So you have to wait, and you have to feel a little anxious at times because they're not prepared. Because ultimately, when they say something, it's hard to come back and say, well, that's not what I meant. So you want to be thoughtful about the things you say, because if you're not, once you say it, it's like throwing a football. Once you throw that football, you hope the receiver catches it, but it can also be intercepted. It can be tipped. Once it's out of your hands, there's nothing else you can do about it. So, being thoughtful about not only when you're communicating, but how and when you're pressing your spouse to communicate. And ultimately, can they give you something that, again, is going to be either good for the relationship or productive for the relationship? So that would be something that I would suggest. And again, going back to the productive and the good. Again, what are you producing? What are you wanting to gain? What is this nugget that you can have? So I'll give you another example. So I had a guy that I was working with who, when he met his girlfriend, he was a slimmer guy. And he was trying out for a football team. So he wanted to gain weight. And he kept gaining weight and gaining weight and gaining weight. And he gained enough weight in order to make the team. So he makes the team, and now he's really happy, his girlfriend's really happy and everything like that. So the coach says, you know what? I need you to put on an additional 25 pounds. I said, okay. So he starts trying to eat more, and he just couldn't do it. Just couldn't eat anymore. And according to him, the coach was perplexed. Like, why can I gain this weight? Why can I gain this weight? And so was he. So I said to him, yo, man, how's your sex life? He's like, what do you mean? I said, well, you've gained, since I've been working with you, you've gained about 75 pounds. It's for work, sure, but how is that impacting your relationship? And he said, yeah, man, I don't think my girl's really attracted to me. Hell, I wouldn't be. I said, oh, okay. So every time that he was eating past a certain point, he kept thinking, every pound that I gain, she's going to like me less and less. She's going to be less and less attracted to me. So it made more sense. So I said, well, why don't you ask, your girlfriend if that's actually the case? So he asked, and again, goes with the stonewall. And so I said, why don't you bring her in? So she comes in, and, and we kind of talk about it. And he sheepishly is kind of talking about the weight gain, though he's really happy that he made the team. And she says, you know what? It's not really that at all. It's actually that my mother's really been sick and that's been weighing on me heavily. So I haven't really had that big of a sex drive. So I was like, oh, okay. So now they were able to communicate that. They were both feeling something that wasn't producing a good, healthy, intimate relationship. Once they were able to talk about that, what they were able to get out of that was, okay, no, it's not my attraction for you. No, it's not actually your weight. And they were able to resume a happy and healthy sexual relationship. So again, if you're being communicative, if you're verbalizing what you're feeling, what your anxieties are, and what you're experiencing, more often than not, you are with the person that you love, right? So there's a reason why you all are together in the first place. So anytime you're thinking about anything you're wanting to do as far as having a closer, clearer picture of what you want with your partner, think about having the productive versus the good conversations, understanding your levels of miscommunication, understanding are we on the same page about the same topic, and ultimately what are you trying to get out of the experience. So once each person is able to talk about those in these sometimes slow and painful ways, the better you will get at being able to have a more productive and healthy relationship. So I think we're at the 40-minute mark. I think this is a good point. So I wanted to say my next show is Tuesday, October 8th at 7 p.m. Right back on Square Media Network. You can reach me at my website at brandonrisher.com, Instagram brandon.risher, and Twitter PLLC Risher. Don't forget about the Square Media Network, the project, the deluxe, Unapologetically Black, the conversation, my show, The Slant, and the situation. Next week, Yolanda Troutman talking about the heart of us all, the art. And again, let's talk politics in Gaston County. Conversation at 7 p.m. and the project at 9. I would like to thank Steve again for giving me this great opportunity. Thank you for tuning in to The Slant. New angles, new perspectives. I'll catch you all next time.